Night falls differently in Praia da Luz. As darkness settles over this small coastal town in Portugal's Algarve region, the Atlantic waves crash against limestone cliffs and warm lights from seaside restaurants cast long shadows across cobblestone streets. It was here on May 3, 2007, that a 3-year-old British girl with bright blonde hair and a distinctive marking in her right eye simply vanished. Her name was Madeleine McCann. What began as an ordinary spring vacation for the McCann family would evolve into what the Daily Telegraph would later describe as the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. In the span of mere minutes, between a routine parental check at 9:05 p.m. and the discovery of her empty bed at 10 p.m., Madeleine disappeared from apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort, leaving behind no traces, no witnesses to the act itself, and a mystery that continues to haunt investigators and captivate the world 17 years later. The facts as we know them are deceptively simple. The McCanns, both doctors from Leicestershire, England, were dining with friends at a tapas restaurant approximately 180 feet from their vacation apartment. They had established a system of regular checks on their sleeping children. But in the narrow window between these checks, someone entered the ground floor apartment and took Madeleine, leaving her 2-year-old twin siblings untouched in their cribs. What followed was a cascade of conflicting witness reports, international media frenzy, false leads, accusations, controversial forensic evidence, and the transformation of this sleepy Portuguese town into the epicenter of a global mystery. Over the coming episodes, we'll meticulously reconstruct the timeline of those crucial hours, days, and years. We'll examine the evidence through the lens of modern criminology and forensic science. We'll explore how this case permanently altered the landscape of missing persons investigations and became a stark lesson in the power and peril of media involvement. This isn't simply the story of a missing child, though that tragedy sits at its heart. It's an examination of parental grief under the public microscope, international police cooperation and conflict, and how a single night in Portugal spawned conspiracy theories that continue to divide public opinion to this day. This is Chapter 1 of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, the vanishing at Praia da Luz, a mystery that begins with a family's dream vacation and evolves into a nightmare from which there has been no waking. The McCann family seemed the portrait of modern British success. Jerry and Kate, both accomplished physicians, had built the life many dream of: professional respect, a comfortable home in the leafy suburb of Rothley, Leicestershire, and 3 beautiful children. Kate McCann, née Healy, had grown up near Liverpool and graduated from the University of Dundee with a degree in medicine. After working in obstetrics and anesthetics, she settled into a career as a general practitioner, balancing her medical practice with motherhood. With her slender build, honey blonde hair, and composed demeanor, Kate was described by friends as meticulous and devoted to her family. Jerry McCann, originally from Glasgow, had followed a similar path of achievement. After earning his medical degree and doctorate, he established himself as a consultant cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital in Leicester. Colleagues described him as analytical, determined, and articulate, qualities that would later serve him through countless press conferences and interviews. It was at a medical job in Glasgow in 1993 that Kate and Jerry first met. 5 years later, they married, and in 2003, their first child, Madeleine Beth McCann, was born, a bright-eyed, fair-haired girl with a distinctive dark fleck in her right iris. The twins, Sean and Amelie, completed their family in 2005. By the spring of 2007, life for the McCanns was demanding but fulfilling. Both parents worked, maintaining the delicate balance of professional and family responsibilities that defines many modern households. As summer approached, they began planning what many families seek: a simple week of relaxation together. The decision to book a holiday at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz came through a recommendation from friends. A group of 7 other adults, 3 other couples, and 1 grandmother, all with young children of similar ages, would join them. The arrangement seemed perfect: affordable accommodations, children's activities, and the company of trusted friends with whom they could share childcare and adult conversation. They booked through Mark Warner Limited, a British holiday company known for family-friendly packages. The resort offered kids' clubs during the day and babysitting services in the evening. The McCanns chose a two-bedroom apartment, 5A, on the ground floor of one of the resort's buildings. Their friends would stay in nearby apartments. What the McCanns sought was utterly ordinary, a brief escape from the routines of work and home life. They packed summer clothes, children's toys, favorite bedtime storybooks, and Madeleine's beloved cuddle cat stuffed animal. In family photos taken the week before their departure, Madeleine appears happy, holding her new holiday sandals and talking excitedly about the swimming pool she would soon enjoy. None of the emails exchanged with friends, none of the holiday planning notes, none of the excited conversations with Madeleine about her upcoming adventures suggested anything other than a typical family vacation. There were no premonitions, no unusual concerns, just the mundane details of sunscreen, swim toys, and flight times. They arrived in Portugal on April 28, 2007. 5 days later, their lives would be irreversibly transformed, their family portrait forever incomplete, their names permanently etched into the annals of tragic mystery. Praia da Luz sits like a postcard come to life on Portugal's southern Algarve coast, a small fishing village transformed into a serene holiday haven. In late April 2007, as the McCanns arrived, the resort town was just awakening from its winter slumber. The season's tourists had not yet descended in full force, leaving the beaches relatively quiet and the whitewashed buildings gleaming against the Mediterranean blue sky. Known to British expatriates as Little Britain for its concentration of English-speaking holidaymakers and homeowners, Praia da Luz offered a comfortable familiarity wrapped in Portuguese charm. The village centered around its crescent-shaped beach, where golden sand met the crystal Atlantic waters. Behind it rose the distinctive Rocha Negra cliff, a dark volcanic outcrop standing in stark contrast to the village's bright facades. The Ocean Club Resort itself wasn't a single hotel building, but rather a sprawling complex of apartments, villas, and facilities scattered throughout the village center. This layout, while offering a more authentic experience of village life, created a permeable boundary between resort grounds and public areas, a detail that would later become critically important. Apartment 5A, where the McCanns stayed, sat at a particularly vulnerable edge of the complex. Located on the ground floor of a 5-unit block known as Waterside Village, it stood at the corner of two roads, Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva and Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins. This corner positioning meant the apartment was accessible to the public from multiple sides, with its sliding glass patio doors in the rear facing the Ocean Club's swimming pool and tapas restaurant. The interior of 5A was modest but functional, a combined living and dining area connected to the patio doors, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. The children's bedroom, where Madeleine and the twins slept, was located near the apartment's front entrance. It contained a single bed where Madeleine slept, 2 travel cots for the twins, and another unused single bed beneath a window. This window, a pivotal element in the unfolding mystery, was secured by a roller shutter and looked out onto a narrow walkway and car park. From their rear patio, the McCanns could see the Ocean Club pool and beyond it, the tapas restaurant where they would dine each evening. Though visible from their apartment, reaching the restaurant required a roundabout journey, exiting through the patio gate, walking along public roads, entering through the main Ocean Club entrance, and traversing the pool area, a distance of approximately 82 meters. Each morning, the gentle sounds of village life would filter through the apartment, distant church bells, fishermen preparing their boats, the voices of shopkeepers setting up for the day. By afternoon, children's laughter would echo from the pool as families enjoyed the warming spring sunshine. Yet beneath the idyllic surface, invisible vulnerabilities lay in wait. The unlocked patio doors, the ground floor location, the easily accessible window shutters, the apartment's position at the edge of the complex rather than nestled within it. These ordinary features would later be scrutinized as potential pathways to tragedy. In the days leading up to May 3rd, unbeknownst to the vacationing families, Praia da Luz had experienced a 4-fold increase in burglaries since January. 2 break-ins had occurred in the very block where the McCanns stayed. Several witnesses would later report seeing strangers watching the apartments, men collecting for fictional charities, and unusual movements around the complex. Paradise, as it often does, harbored shadows that only became visible once darkness fell. The Tapas Seven, Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield, David and Fiona Payne, and Fiona's mother Diane Webster, weren't just holiday companions to the McCanns. They were longtime friends and colleagues, many with medical backgrounds like Jerry and Kate. The couples had planned this spring getaway together, seeking a brief escape from their busy professional lives back in the UK. Little did they know their group vacation would thrust them into the center of an international mystery. The 9 adults settled into a comfortable holiday routine at the Ocean Club. During the days, they'd divide their time between the pool, tennis courts, and occasional trips to the beach. Their children, all under 5 years old, often attended the resort's kids' club together for structured activities. But it was their evening arrangement that would later come under intense scrutiny. Each night, the group reserved the same table at the Ocean Club's open-air tapas restaurant, a casual Mediterranean eatery overlooking the swimming pool. Their table booking was noted in the resort's reservation book with a curious detail. Block booking, table for 8:30 p.m. All guests are leaving children alone in apartments. Please make sure table is ready. This innocent note, visible to staff and potentially others passing by reception, effectively advertised that their apartments would be unoccupied except for sleeping children. The distance between their apartments and the restaurant measured about 82 meters as one walked. Not far, but critically, the dining area was not within direct line of sight of the apartment's front doors. From their table, the adults could see the upper floors of the apartment block, but not the ground floor entrances or windows. The patio doors of 5A were visible only if one stood up and specifically looked for them across the pool area. To manage this arrangement, the group established what they believed was a responsible system of regular checks. Approximately every half hour, one of the parents would leave the table to look in on all their children. The routine created natural breaks in the evening, with someone always slipping away from conversation to walk back to the apartments. "We were dining so close," Matthew Oldfield would later tell investigators. "It was a similar distance to dining in your back garden, in our view." This perspective, that their arrangement was equivalent to eating in an adjacent room while children slept, would eventually be challenged by both investigators and public opinion. The dynamics within the group were relaxed and familiar. They shared bottles of wine, swapped parenting stories, and enjoyed the easy camaraderie of old friends. Photos from earlier evenings that week show them laughing, raising glasses. The tapas restaurant's warm lighting creating a holiday glow as the Portuguese spring evenings cooled around them. These 7 individuals had no way of knowing that their every movement, conversation, and decision that week would eventually be dissected by police investigators from multiple countries, journalists from around the world, and armchair detectives across the internet. Their witness statements would be translated, retranslated, and analyzed for inconsistencies. Their phone records would be scrutinized, their characters examined, and their loyalty to the McCanns repeatedly questioned. In the years to come, they would collectively become known as the Tapas Seven, bound together not just by friendship, but by their presence at the epicenter of one of the most perplexing disappearances in modern history. May 3, 2007, began like any other day of the McCann family's vacation in Portugal. The date was Thursday, the penultimate day of their week-long stay at the Ocean Club resort in Praia da Luz. No one could have imagined it would be the last day of normalcy before their lives were forever altered. Morning broke with the McCann family gathering for breakfast in their ground-floor apartment, 5A. Kate, Jerry, 3-year-old Madeleine, and 2-year-old twins Sean and Emily sat together as sunlight filtered through the patio doors. It was during this ordinary family moment that Madeleine asked a question that would later haunt her parents. "Why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" she asked innocently. Kate and Jerry exchanged glances. Neither had heard the children crying the previous evening. They gently questioned Madeleine, who didn't elaborate further. The conversation moved on, as conversations with toddlers often do, but the comment lingered. Later, in the harsh light of hindsight, this simple question would take on painful significance. Had someone been in the children's bedroom the night before? Had Madeleine woken to an intruder who fled when she stirred? Another detail Kate noticed, a large brown stain on Madeleine's pajama top. Unremarkable at the time, just another bit of breakfast mess. But later, like everything else about that day, it would be scrutinized for meaning. After breakfast, the children were dropped off at the resort's kids club around 9:30 a.m., where they joined the children of the Tapas 7 for organized activities. Staff would later recall Madeleine as a bright, engaging child who participated enthusiastically in the morning's games and crafts. At midday, the family reconvened at their apartment for lunch. Kate prepared a simple meal while Jerry entertained the children. They ate together on the apartment's small patio, discussing plans for the afternoon. There was talk of going to the beach the next day, their last full day of vacation. After lunch, the family walked to the resort's swimming pool. The weather was pleasant, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze coming off the Atlantic Ocean just beyond the resort complex. While Jerry chatted with other guests, Kate took what would become the last confirmed photograph of Madeleine at 2:29 p.m. The image shows a smiling Madeleine sitting by the pool's edge, her legs dangling in the water. She wears a pink sun hat, white top, and pink shorts. Beside her sits Jerry, relaxed in sunglasses, and little Amelie. Madeleine's smile is bright, her eyes squinting slightly in the sunshine. There is nothing in this ordinary holiday snapshot to suggest the tragedy that would unfold in less than 8 hours. After pool time, the children returned to the kids' club for the afternoon session. Kate used this time to go for a jog along the beach, a rare moment of solitude. Jerry went to a tennis lesson with other guests. At approximately 6:00 p.m., Kate collected all 3 children from the kids' club. Staff noted nothing unusual about Madeleine's behavior or demeanor when she left. Kate walked the children back to apartment 5A, where she bathed all 3 before Jerry returned from his tennis session around 6:30 p.m. The evening routine proceeded normally. The children played on the living room floor while Kate prepared their dinner. They ate together as a family around 6:45 p.m. Afterward, the children changed into pajamas. Madeleine put on her favorite Eeyore pajamas, pink and white with the beloved character from Winnie the Pooh. She clutched her special soft toy, Cuddle Cat, as she climbed into her bed in the front bedroom of the apartment. Jerry read the children a story. Then Kate sat with them, Madeleine in the single bed nearest the bedroom door, the twins in travel cots in the middle of the room. By 7:30 p.m., all 3 McCann children were settled for the night. Neither parent knew that these ordinary, tender moments would be their last with Madeleine. That bedtime, unremarkable in its routine, would be endlessly revisited in police interviews, court testimony, and sleepless nights. The McCanns closed the bedroom door partway, leaving it slightly ajar, and prepared for their own evening. Dinner with friends at the tapas restaurant across the resort complex. The last normal day was ending. The last normal night would never come. As darkness fell over Praia da Luz on May 3rd, apartment 5A grew quiet. The children were asleep by 7:30 p.m., and Kate and Jerry McCann prepared for dinner with their friends at the tapas restaurant about 50 meters away. The night was mild, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. At 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry left their apartment. Before departing, Jerry double-checked on the children, finding all 3 sleeping soundly. The couple walked down the patio steps, through the small gate, and into the narrow street below. They closed the gate behind them, but left the patio doors unlocked. Their rationale, as Kate would later explain in her book: "We locked the front door, but left the patio doors on the latch so we could get back in that way. We didn't want to take the keys with us in case we lost them." The tapas restaurant was visible from their apartment, but not directly. The route required walking along Rua Dr. Agostinho de Silva, entering the resort's main reception area, and crossing the pool area to reach the restaurant. Approximately an 80-meter journey that took a minute or 2 at normal walking pace. When they arrived, their friends, later dubbed the Tapas 7 by the media, were already gathered. Jane Tanner and Russell O'Brien, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield, David and Fiona Payne, and Fiona's mother, Diane Webster. The group had a standing reservation for 8:30 p.m. each evening, which had been noted in the restaurant's reservation book. Table for 9 adults, 8:30 p.m., all children in bed. This seemingly mundane detail would later be scrutinized. Had someone with access to the booking register seen the note and understood that several apartments contained sleeping children without adult supervision? The tapas restaurant was busy that evening. Staff would later recall that service was slower than usual. The group ordered drinks and chattered as they waited for their food. At their table, conversation flowed naturally between old friends, careers, children, plans for the remaining days of their holiday. At 9:05 p.m., Jerry rose from the table for the first scheduled check on the children. He walked the short distance back to apartment 5A, entered through the unlocked patio doors, and went to the children's bedroom. All three were sleeping peacefully. He recalled noticing that the bedroom door was open wider than he had left it, about 45 degrees rather than the 30-degree angle he remembered. Thinking nothing of it, he adjusted the door back to how he preferred it and returned to the restaurant. They were all sound asleep and all looked so beautiful, Jerry later told police. On his way back, Jerry stopped briefly to chat with Jeremy Wilkins, another British holidaymaker he had met during the week. This brief conversation, which lasted only a minute or two, would later become significant. Jane Tanner left the table to check on her own children at around 9:10 p.m., and as she walked back to the restaurant, she passed Jerry and Wilkins deep in conversation. Neither man recalled seeing her. What Jane Tanner did see, she later reported, was a man carrying a child approximately 45 meters from the McCann's apartment. She described him as a white male, 35 to 40 years old, with dark hair, wearing beige or gold-colored trousers and a dark jacket. The child, she said, appeared to be wearing light-colored pajamas and was being carried across his arms. At the time, Tanner thought little of it. Just a parent carrying a sleeping child home from the resort's evening childcare service. Meanwhile, at the tapas restaurant, dinner continued. The next check was conducted by Matthew Oldfield at approximately 9:30 p.m. He offered to look in on the McCann children as well as his own. Oldfield entered apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors and noticed the children's bedroom door was wide open. He glanced into the darkened room from the doorway but did not enter. He heard no sounds and assumed all three children were still sleeping. Crucially, he could not see Madeleine's bed from his vantage point at the door. The door was lying wide open and I could see into the room. I didn't actually go in and see the beds themselves, Oldfield later stated. At 10:00 p.m., Kate McCann rose from the table to perform her scheduled check. As she approached apartment 5A in the darkness, nothing seemed amiss. She entered through the patio doors as planned. The moment she stepped into the living room, she sensed something wasn't right. There was a breeze, stronger than she expected. Kate walked toward the children's bedroom and realized the door was wide open, not as she had left it. When she tried to close it, the door suddenly slammed shut due to the draft. It was then that Kate noticed the bedroom window was open and the shutters, which had been closed, were now raised. Heart racing, she turned toward the beds. In the dim light coming from the hallway, she could see the twins still sleeping in their cots. Then her eyes fell on Madeleine's bed. The covers were pulled back. Cuddle Cat lay on the pillow. Madeleine was gone. I went into the bedroom and I couldn't see her, Kate later recounted. I couldn't see her, but I knew straight away she wasn't there because I could see her bed and I knew she wasn't in our bed. That was the first time I looked in our room as well, and I just knew she'd gone. I ran to the window straight away, and that was when I saw the window had been pushed right up and the shutters were raised all the way. Kate frantically searched the apartment, under beds and wardrobes in the bathroom. Within seconds, the terrible reality set in. She rushed back to the patio doors and toward the restaurant, leaving the twins asleep. She ran the 80-meter distance at full speed. "We've got a missing child," the restaurant manager heard her shout. "We've got a missing child." Jerry met her at the restaurant entrance. Witnesses recall Kate's exact words. "Madeleine's gone. Someone's taken her." It was 10:10 p.m. The peaceful Portuguese resort erupted into chaos as staff and guests joined the search for Madeleine. The police were called but wouldn't arrive for nearly an hour. Meanwhile, another vacationing family, Martin Smith and his relatives from Ireland, were walking back to their accommodation after dinner at a restaurant in the town center. Around 10:00 p.m., on Rua da Escola Primaria, about 500 yards from the McCann's apartment, they passed a man carrying a young girl. She appeared to be sleeping deeply, her arms hanging limp. The man seemed uncomfortable, walking determinedly toward the beach. The Smiths thought nothing of it at the time. Within hours, these separate sightings, Tanner's at 9:15 p.m. and the Smiths at 10:00 p.m., would become crucial pieces of a puzzle that remains unsolved to this day. In the complex puzzle of Madeleine McCann's disappearance, two witness sightings stand as potentially critical evidence, brief moments that might have captured her abductor in the act. Yet, like so much in this case, these sightings have generated as many questions as answers. The first sighting came from Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7 dining with the McCanns that night. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Tanner left the Tapas restaurant to check on her own children. As she walked along Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, she passed Jerry McCann chatting with another holidaymaker, Jeremy Wilkins. Just beyond them, Tanner observed something that didn't seem significant at the time, a man carrying a child. He was walking across the junction ahead of her, moving away from the area of the McCann's apartment. She described him as a white male, 35 to 40 years old, with dark hair, wearing beige or gold-colored trousers and a dark jacket. The child appeared to be wearing light-colored pajamas with a floral pattern. "I would recognize the man if I saw him again," Tanner told police. "He wasn't walking particularly quickly, but purposefully. The child looked like a little girl, and I remember thinking she didn't look wrapped up enough for the night air." For years, this became known as the Tanner sighting and was considered the possible moment of Madeleine's abduction, seen but not recognized as such. The timing would have placed this man walking away with Madeleine while her father was standing just yards away during the 9:05 p.m. check. This would have meant Madeleine was taken within a narrow 5 to 6 minute window between Jerry leaving the apartment and Jane walking past. Yet this sighting contained a puzzling contradiction. Neither Jerry nor Jeremy Wilkins recalled seeing Jane Tanner walk past them, despite the narrow street. And neither man saw the person carrying a child, someone who would have passed within yards of them. The second critical sighting occurred around 10:00 p.m., the approximate time Kate discovered Madeleine missing. Martin Smith, an Irish businessman vacationing in Praia da Luz with his family, was walking back from Kelly's bar with his wife and children. On Rua da Escola Primaria, about 500 yards from the Ocean Club, they passed a man carrying a young child. The Smith family's description was eerily similar to Tanner's. They described a white male in his mid-30s, 5'7" to 5'9" tall, with short brown hair, wearing beige trousers. The child was 3 to 4 years old with blonde hair, wearing light-colored pajamas, and appeared to be deeply asleep. The man wasn't carrying a blanket or any other item. He was carrying the child across his arms in front of him. She had her head against his left shoulder, Smith later stated. He appeared not to be a tourist. His clothes looked too heavy for the weather. He didn't look comfortable carrying the child. Unlike the Tanner sighting, the man the Smiths saw was walking toward the beach area, in the opposite direction from where Tanner's man had been heading. The timing and location would have allowed someone to take Madeleine around 9:30 p.m. and make their way through town by 10:00. Criminologists note that these sightings present both opportunity and confusion. Were they the same person seen at different times and locations? Were they two different people, only one of whom had Madeleine? Or were they both innocent holidaymakers carrying their own sleeping children? The investigation faced another twist in September 2007. After returning to Ireland, Martin Smith saw television footage of the McCann family arriving back in England from Portugal. As Jerry McCann descended the airplane steps carrying his sleeping son, Smith experienced a jolt of recognition, the way Jerry carried the child, his build, his clothing. It reminded him strongly of the man he had seen that night in Praia da Luz. Smith reported this to police, but later expressed uncertainty about the identification, especially after learning that Jerry was confirmed to be at the restaurant at 10:00 p.m. when the Smith sighting occurred. 6 years later, in 2013, Scotland Yard would dramatically announce that they believed the Tanner sighting was an innocent British father collecting his daughter from the resort's night creche. The man had come forward after an appeal and was photographed in similar clothing, confirming Tanner's sighting was likely a misunderstanding, not Madeleine's abductor at all. This revelation shifted the investigation's focus squarely to the Smith sighting, which suddenly became the most likely glimpse of Madeleine's abductor. Scotland Yard released EFIT images based on the Smiths' testimony and featured them prominently in a 2013 Crime Watch appeal. These two sightings, one potentially eliminated, one elevated in importance, demonstrate the challenging nature of eyewitness testimony and the razor-thin margins between coincidence and evidence in a case where every minute matters. The chaos that followed Kate McCann's desperate cry of "they've taken her" turned the tranquil vacation resort into a scene of frantic activity. Within minutes, the carefully planned holiday atmosphere of Ocean Club Resort dissolved into disorder as guests and staff mobilized for what would become one of the largest missing person searches in European history. Resort staff responded immediately. Night manager John Hill activated the resort's missing child protocol at 10:30 p.m., deploying approximately 60 staff members and guests to comb the grounds. Maintenance workers, gardeners, receptionists, and restaurant staff formed informal search parties, fanning out across the complex with flashlights borrowed from guest apartments. "You could hear people calling her name from one end of Praia da Luz to the other," recalled one witness. "It was surreal. All these voices in the darkness shouting Madeleine over and over." While resort staff searched, Jerry McCann and several friends rushed to the reception to call police. The local Guardia Nacional Republicana officers didn't arrive until 11:10 p.m., a crucial 40-minute delay. The GNR, Portugal's military police force, had limited missing persons training and were primarily responsible for traffic and minor infractions. Only after midnight did they contact the Polícia Judiciária, the criminal investigation agency, who were based in Portimão, 5 miles away. By the time specialized investigators arrived, the crime scene at apartment 5A had been catastrophically compromised. Between 20 and 30 people had entered the apartment, potentially destroying evidence. Fingerprints were smudged, DNA contaminated, and possible scent trails for tracking dogs obliterated by well-meaning searchers. One Portuguese detective later admitted, "The scene was not properly preserved. This is basic procedure in any potential crime scene, but especially in a child abduction. Those first hours were chaotic." The critical errors continued mounting. Border police weren't notified until the following morning, nearly 10 hours after Madeleine vanished. Roadblocks on the highway to Spain weren't established until 10 a.m. the next day. The company monitoring highway surveillance cameras was never asked to preserve footage of vehicles leaving Praia da Luz that night. Nearby construction sites, potential places where a child might wander or fall, weren't thoroughly searched until days later. When forensic teams finally dusted the apartment's exterior shutters for fingerprints, officers failed to wear protective clothing, further contaminating potential evidence. One officer placed crime scene tape across the bedroom doorway but left at 3:00 a.m. without securing the apartment. For 4 weeks afterward, the apartment remained unsealed, with tourists even staying there before it was finally closed for more thorough forensic testing in August. These missteps weren't unusual for Portugal, where child abductions were exceptionally rare. According to Portuguese criminal statistics from 2006, only 2 stranger abductions of children under age 14 had been reported nationwide in the previous 5 years. The police simply lacked protocols for such cases. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a renowned memory expert, explains the psychological impact of those first hours. The confusion and panic that follow a child's disappearance affect everyone involved. Parents, witnesses, even first responders. Memories become susceptible to suggestion. Details blur, and the emotional intensity creates a false sense of clarity about certain events while completely obscuring others. For the McCanns, these early hours produced a nightmare cocktail of adrenaline, terror, and helplessness. Kate described running through the apartment repeatedly, pulling back shower curtains, looking under beds, places she had already searched, hoping somehow she'd find Madeleine hiding. These repetitive behaviors are classic responses to acute trauma, where the brain refuses to accept the unacceptable. Meanwhile, by 4:30 a.m., with no sign of Madeleine and exhaustion setting in, the organized search was temporarily suspended until daylight. The McCanns remained awake, the first terrible night of what would become years of uncertainty stretching before them. Victims not only of whoever took their daughter, but also of those crucial early mistakes that may have cost them their best chance of finding her. In missing persons investigations, particularly those involving children. Experts refer to the first 24 hours as the golden hours. This critical window represents the best and often only opportunity to recover the victim alive and apprehend the perpetrator. In Madeleine McCann's case, these golden hours were squandered through a series of catastrophic investigative failures. The timeline of mistakes is damning. It wasn't until 10:00 a.m. on May 4th, a full 12 hours after Madeleine's disappearance, that Portuguese authorities finally established roadblocks. By then, if an abductor had taken her across the nearby Spanish border, they would have had ample time to travel hundreds of miles in any direction. Maritime police weren't notified until morning, despite Praia da Luz being a coastal town with a marina where a child could easily be transported by boat. Interpol wasn't alerted for 5 days. Perhaps most inexplicably, Euroscut, the company monitoring Portugal's highway cameras, was never contacted to preserve crucial footage of vehicles leaving the area on the night of May 3rd. Former FBI profiler James Fitzgerald later observed, "In child abduction cases, we operate on the understanding that with each passing hour, the probability of recovery diminishes approximately 10%. After 24 hours, your chances of finding the child alive drop below 50%. The delays in the McCann case essentially gave any potential abductor a head start that law enforcement could never overcome. The border with Spain lies just 90 minutes from Praia da Luz, a border that, under the Schengen Agreement, allowed passage without passport checks. Beyond Spain lay the rest of Europe, and from Portuguese ports, North Africa was easily accessible. Each hour without border alerts exponentially expanded the search radius by thousands of square miles. Detective Superintendent Marshall Peterson, a British expert in child abduction cases, explains the standard procedure. Within the first hour, you establish an immediate search perimeter of 1 mile. Notify all transportation hubs within a 30-mile radius and activate border alerts. By hour 3, you should have a coordinated grid search with trained personnel, not hotel staff. By hour 6, you need international notifications and media strategies. None of this happened in Madeleine's case. Instead, the Portuguese police showed a shocking lack of urgency. Rather than treating the disappearance as an abduction from the outset, they initially pursued the theory that Madeleine had wandered off, despite her age and the locked apartment gates making this highly improbable. When they finally shifted to an abduction theory, valuable time had already been lost. Criminologist David Wilson notes, "The most successful child recovery operations involve immediate response teams trained specifically in abduction protocols. Portugal simply didn't have this infrastructure in place." This wasn't just a matter of resources, but of experience. Child abductions by strangers were virtually unknown in Portugal. The country's entire law enforcement mechanism was unprepared for a case of this magnitude. Perhaps most troubling was the failure to conduct thorough witness canvassing. Years later, British tourists would come forward stating they had never been interviewed, despite being at the resort that week. Some reported seeing suspicious individuals near the McCann apartment in the days before the disappearance, information that might have been crucial if collected immediately. Computer records from the Ocean Club's reception area, which might have contained vital guest information, were never properly secured. CCTV footage from nearby businesses was collected too late, after recording cycles had overwritten the critical night's data. Forensic pathologist Dr. Anna Williams summarized the cascading failures. Every delayed action in those first 24 hours represents a piece of evidence lost forever. Scent trails dissipate, memories fade, physical evidence degrades or disappears completely. In the McCann case, by the time specialized investigators fully engaged, they weren't working with a fresh crime scene. They were essentially conducting a cold case investigation from day one. The golden hours had turned to dust. Within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, what began as a local missing child case transformed into an unprecedented global media phenomenon. The world had seen missing children before, but never one whose image would become so ubiquitous, or whose parents would navigate the media landscape with such strategic precision. The first television appeals by Kate and Jerry McCann aired less than 24 hours after Madeleine vanished. Ashen-faced and visibly exhausted, they faced the cameras with a composure that would later be scrutinized. Kate clutched Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's stuffed toy, as she pleaded, Please, if you have Madeleine, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother, and sister. Their appearance struck a chord with viewers around the world. Within days, Madeleine's face, with her distinctive right eye featuring a rare coloboma, a dark smudge where her iris met her pupil, became one of the most recognizable images globally. Her fourth birthday on May 12th, just 9 days after her disappearance, only intensified media interest. Jerry McCann, in a 2008 interview with Vanity Fair, was remarkably candid about their approach. I decided that the marketing of Madeleine was going to be key. As much as we wanted to protect and grieve in private, we recognized, probably more quickly than most, that the media were going to be important if we were ever going to find her. This marketing strategy was unprecedented for the family of a missing child. The McCanns assembled a formidable PR machine that would be the envy of multinational corporations. The British government dispatched Clarence Mitchell, director of its media monitoring unit, to manage press relations. When official support ended, wealthy benefactors stepped in to fund Mitchell's continued service. By late May, the campaign had snowballed. The couple flew to Rome in billionaire retailer Sir Philip Green's private jet to meet Pope Benedict XVI. Yellow Find Madeleine wristbands appeared on celebrities' wrists. David Beckham made a televised appeal. J.K. Rowling contributed millions to search funds and rewards. Richard Branson covered legal expenses. The media coverage reached extraordinary proportions. Between May 2007 and July 2008, the Portuguese tabloid Correio da Manhã alone published 384 articles about Madeleine. Sky News created a dedicated menu option on its programming guide. UK News, Madeleine, World News. The Daily Express featured her on its front page almost daily for 6 months, but the media's initial sympathy gradually curdled into something darker. Former Scotland Yard Commander Roy Ram observed, "The McCanns' relationship with the press was Faustian. They needed the publicity to find their daughter, but the media beast they fed would eventually turn on them." By June, the tone shifted noticeably. The spotlight that had illuminated the search for Madeleine began to cast long shadows on her parents. Their apparent composure, once admired, became suspicious. Their media savvy, once praised, was reframed as manipulation. The first explicit challenge came at a Berlin press conference when a German journalist asked bluntly if they had anything to do with Madeleine's disappearance. The shocked silence that followed marked a turning point. The narrative was shifting from parents of missing girl to suspects under scrutiny. Media analyst Claire Hardacre later noted, "The McCann case represents the first true social media missing person investigation." As traditional outlets published increasingly speculative stories, online forums became echo chambers for conspiracy theories. The line between reporting and entertainment completely dissolved. This explosion of coverage created tangible consequences for the investigation. Portuguese detectives, unused to such attention, felt pressured and scrutinized. Witnesses became reluctant to come forward, fearing media exposure. Tips flooded in by the thousands, most useless or false, overwhelming investigators. The media frenzy both amplified the search for Madeleine and distorted it beyond recognition. What began as a tool became a torrent that swept the investigation in unexpected and often counterproductive directions. The psychological toll on Kate and Jerry McCann began the moment they realized their daughter was missing and intensified under the relentless glare of public scrutiny. As days turned to weeks and months, they found themselves trapped in what trauma psychologist Dr. Emily Wilson describes as a unique form of sustained psychological torture. Unlike most grieving parents, the McCanns couldn't process their trauma privately. Every tear, every word, every gesture was analyzed and often weaponized against them. Their grief became public property. When a child goes missing, parents experience what we call ambiguous loss, a particularly devastating form of grief, explains forensic psychologist Dr. Mark Holden. There's no closure, no body to bury, no certainty. The mind cycles endlessly through possibilities, from hope to horror and back again. This state of limbo creates what neuropsychologists term cognitive dissonance. The McCanns had to simultaneously maintain hope that Madeleine was alive while processing the possibility she might be dead. This psychological splitting manifested in their public appearances, maintaining composure while discussing nightmare scenarios. Kate's decision to cling to Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's favorite toy, illustrated this tension. She carried it everywhere, often bringing it to her face to smell her daughter's scent. This behavior, normal for grieving parents, became fodder for criticism when cadaver dogs later alerted to the toy. A cruel collision of grief and suspicion. Memory itself becomes unreliable under extreme stress. When Portuguese police questioned the McCanns and their friends about discrepancies in their timelines, they were observing a well-documented psychological phenomenon. Studies show that trauma fragments memory, particularly around sequence and time. Details become distorted not through deception but through the brain's imperfect processing of overwhelming events. The brain under acute stress prioritizes survival over accurate recording, notes cognitive psychologist Dr. Sarah Bennett. Inconsistent witness statements are the rule, not the exception, in cases involving trauma. Perhaps most damaging was the public's misreading of the McCann's emotional presentation. Kate was criticized for appearing too controlled, too composed, not matching the public's expectation of a grieving mother. This phenomenon, known as affect expectancy, ignores how differently trauma manifests across individuals. Some parents collapse, others function with almost mechanical precision, explains crisis counselor Thomas Reed. Kate McCann's apparent composure wasn't evidence of guilt, but of psychological survival. She was likely in a state of functional shock. The advice given to the McCanns compounded this problem. Abduction experts had specifically counseled Kate not to show emotion publicly, warning that perpetrators often watch media coverage and might derive satisfaction from visible distress. This guidance, meant to protect Madeleine, was later used against her mother. The pressure intensified as Portuguese media began questioning their parenting. The vacation check-in system they had established, visiting their children every half hour rather than using the resort's babysitting service, became evidence of negligence rather than routine parental compromise. When a tragedy occurs, we often engage in what psychologists call hindsight bias, explains Dr. Holden. Decisions that seemed reasonable beforehand become inexcusable afterward. It's a way for people to distance themselves from the terrifying randomness of tragedy. By autumn 2007, as suspicion mounted, the McCanns found themselves in an impossible psychological position. Grieving parents transformed into suspects, fighting not just to find their daughter but to defend their innocence, all while trying to maintain normality for their twins. The case of Madeleine McCann reveals not just the psychology of parents in crisis, but our collective psychological response to missing children cases, our need for resolution, for someone to blame, and for the reassurance that such tragedies happen only to others who are somehow different from ourselves. In the weeks following Madeleine's disappearance, the investigation shifted dramatically. What began as an international search for an abducted child gradually transformed into something far more disturbing: suspicion of the parents themselves. By late July 2007, the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária had grown frustrated with the lack of progress. The massive search had yielded nothing. No ransom demands had materialized. The hundreds of reported sightings across Europe and North Africa had led nowhere. Something wasn't adding up. British police specialist Mark Harrison arrived in Praia da Luz to review the investigation and made a recommendation that would change everything. Bring in specialized British cadaver dogs to search the apartment, surrounding areas, and the McCann's possessions. On July 31st, the dogs arrived with handler Martin Grime. Eddie, an enhanced victim recovery dog, was trained to alert exclusively to the scent of human cadavers. Keela, a crime scene investigation dog, was trained to detect microscopic traces of human blood. Together, they represented the cutting edge of forensic investigation. What happened next stunned investigators and set off a media earthquake. Inside apartment 5A, Eddie alerted behind the sofa in the living room and near the wardrobe in the McCann's bedroom. Keela indicated possible blood traces in the same locations. The dog's reactions suggested something unthinkable, that a body had been present in the apartment. But it was what happened next that truly shifted the investigation's focus. When the dogs were brought to the McCann's rental car, a Renault Scenic hired 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance, Eddie alerted at the vehicle's trunk and driver's door. Keela indicated blood in similar locations. "The dogs don't lie," a Portuguese detective told journalists off the record. "These animals can detect the scent of death even after it's been cleaned or moved. They've been used in hundreds of cases with remarkable accuracy." The police theory began to take shape. Perhaps Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment, and her parents had concealed her body, only to move it weeks later using the rental car. Samples from the apartment and car were sent to the Forensic Science Service laboratory in Birmingham, England. Portuguese media, fueled by leaks from within the investigation, reported the findings as conclusive before the scientific analysis was complete. "The police have Madeleine's DNA from the rental car," declared one headline. "100% match," proclaimed another. Behind closed doors, forensic scientists were more cautious. The samples contained what's known as low copy number DNA, extremely small amounts that required amplification. Such testing is notoriously difficult to interpret, especially in an apartment and car that could contain Madeleine's DNA through innocent transfer from clothing or toys. On September 7, 2007, Portuguese police formally named Kate and Jerry McCann as arguidos, official suspects. During her 11-hour interrogation, Kate was allegedly offered a deal: confess that Madeleine died accidentally and receive a light sentence. She refused to answer 48 questions. The forensic results finally arrived, but they were far from the smoking gun Portuguese investigators had anticipated. John Lowe of the FSS wrote that the DNA evidence was too complex for meaningful interpretation. Of Madeleine's 19 DNA markers, only 15 appeared in the sample, along with markers from at least 3 other people. The scientific evidence simply couldn't support the dramatic theory. But by then, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida of the PJ signed a 9-page report concluding that the minor Madeleine died in apartment 5A as a result of an accident, and that her parents had simulated an abduction. The report alleged that the Tapa 7 had helped conceal the truth. News headlines worldwide repeated variations of the same question: what did the McCanns do with their daughter? The hypothesis required believing that 2 grief-stricken parents had somehow hidden their daughter's body in a foreign country under intense scrutiny, only to retrieve and transport it 24 days later. It required believing that 2 doctors with no criminal history had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up while simultaneously launching a global media campaign to find their daughter. For many, the parents now seemed guilty not just of negligence for leaving their children alone, but of something far worse. The case of Madeleine McCann had transformed from the search for a predator into a mystery much closer to home, a shift that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. In the days and weeks ahead, the case of Madeleine McCann would evolve beyond anything seen before in the history of missing persons investigations. What began in a small Portuguese resort town would soon captivate the entire world, transforming into a global hunt of unprecedented scale and scrutiny. As headlines multiplied across continents, the search for Madeleine expanded dramatically. Reported sightings flooded in from Morocco, Spain, Belgium, Malta, and as far away as New Zealand and Guatemala. Each required investigation, each raised hopes only to dash them again. A reported sighting in Morocco particularly captured international attention when a tourist photographed a child resembling Madeleine being carried on a woman's back, later determined to be a local girl. The machinery of celebrity and influence mobilized behind the McCanns. Richard Branson contributed £100,000 to their legal fund. J.K. Rowling helped distribute posters across Europe. The Pope granted them a brief audience in Rome, blessing a photograph of Madeleine. The McCanns became recognizable worldwide. Their stoic press conferences beamed into millions of homes. But with visibility came vulnerability. The case began revealing deep cultural divides between British and Portuguese approaches to parenting, investigation, and media relations. Portuguese newspapers questioned why British parents would leave young children alone while dining. British tabloids criticized the Portuguese police's handling of the investigation. These tensions would only intensify as the case progressed. Despite clearing the McCanns as suspects in July 2008, the Portuguese authorities closed the investigation, declaring it an unsolved mystery. The case file, when finally released to the public, contained more than 11,000 pages of witness statements, interviews, and forensic reports, yet no definitive answer about what happened to Madeleine. The McCanns refused to accept this conclusion. They launched private investigations funded by millions in donations, hiring a series of detective agencies with varying approaches and degrees of success. Método 3, a Spanish agency, boldly claimed they knew who the kidnapper was, while Oakley International deployed undercover operatives to infiltrate pedophile rings. These private efforts would uncover leads the original investigation had missed. Meanwhile, the media narrative continued its relentless evolution. Kate McCann found herself subjected to brutal scrutiny, her composed demeanor interpreted as coldness, her physical appearance dissected, her maternal instincts questioned. Jerry's analytical approach was viewed as calculating rather than as a coping mechanism. Every gesture was analyzed, every tear or lack thereof becoming evidence in the court of public opinion. In the background, conspiracy theories flourished, particularly online. Social media platforms became breeding grounds for amateur sleuths and accusers alike. The emerging hashtag McCann would become one of Twitter's most persistent, generating hundreds of thousands of tweets, many hostile toward the parents. And what of Madeleine herself? As months turned to years, age progression images showed how she might look at 6, then 9, then 13. A child growing up only in digital renderings. The gap between the smiling 3-year-old from the iconic photograph and these speculative portraits grew wider, a visual reminder of all the milestones missed. In our next chapter, we'll examine the cold case review launched by Scotland Yard in 2011 at the behest of Prime Minister David Cameron, Operation Grange. After years of dead ends, British detectives would take a fresh approach, identifying new persons of interest and developing theories that had been overlooked. We'll explore the forensic advancements that allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence. We'll investigate the shadowy figures who became suspects years after the disappearance. The men seen lurking near apartment 5A, the string of sexual assaults on British children in the Algarve region that had gone unreported, and the burglaries targeting holiday apartments in the weeks before Madeleine vanished. As we continue our journey through this labyrinthine case, we'll confront the most haunting questions of all. Was Madeleine taken by a predator who had been watching the apartment? Did she wander out alone and encounter someone opportunistically? Or, as Portuguese investigators initially concluded, did something happen inside apartment 5A that night that has been concealed ever since? The disappearance of Madeleine McCann isn't just a mystery to be solved. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, our media consumption, our judgment of other parents, and our desperate need for resolution. In seeking Madeleine, we are all searching for answers, not just about what happened on May 3, 2007, but about what kind of world we live in, and what happens when the unthinkable intrudes upon the ordinary.